If you've picked up Baldur's Gate 3 or are wanting to pick the game up but are overwhelmed by the game's seemingly complex abundance of mechanics and systems, this guide is definitely for you. Today I wanted to break down the most critical elements of Baldur's Gate 3 in order to help you get better acquainted to the game that much faster and not get purely overwhelmed by everything that the game throws at you. I also felt a bit overwhelmed by the game's world, mechanics and systems in my first playthrough, but this guide and the game itself will do a great job in providing you with the necessary information you'll need to make this a more seamless journey, while of course allowing you to discover things on your own. With all of that said, let's get right into this video. Starting with the most basic of all the points on this list, this is the creation of your character and what option you should go with for the best first time experience. There are three main options that would pertain to the majority of players. The first of these is the most obvious one and the one that Larian themselves would recommend in order for you to have the best first time experience, with this being to create a fully customizable character for yourself. Here you'll be able to choose your character's classes, proficiencies, stats and so much more, really allowing you to mold your playable protagonist in any way that you want and really get into the role-playing aspect of the game as your very own character. The second option you've got, which you might be intrigued about when opening up the game's character creator for the first time, is the origin characters. These are actually the in-game companions that you'll find and journey with in your adventure through this game, but you can actually play as them from the get-go, with of course their own predefined race, class, appearance and background, with some customizability afforded to you in terms of their abilities and stats. I wouldn't recommend this for a first playthrough, but it is definitely an option if you do want to go this route. Now, the final option is arguably the most interesting, and that is the Dark Urge. This character is also fully customizable like the first option, but has their own unique story and predefined background, of which will significantly alter the narrative of the game. But again, I wouldn't recommend this for the first playthrough of the game. Of course, you should go with what you want, but creating your own fully customizable character is definitely the path that I'd recommend for your first time with this game. Now, to discuss stats and proficiencies, let's start off with your character's own stats. Stats are very important in this game and will impact several aspects of the gameplay, such as your character's aptitude with spellcasting, especially in regard to specific classes, your carrying capacity, and so much more. It's recommended by most that you try to make all of your stats an even number, as the bonuses you'll get from having certain stats high are applied only for even values. That's pretty much all there is in terms of stats for the game, and they're pretty self-explanatory once you get into the game and get accustomed to how exactly they will affect your character's own gameplay. Proficiencies, on the other hand, are much more critical and will affect your chances of success with dice rolls associated with them. For example, let's say you are trying to lockpick something. By having a proficiency in lockpicking itself or just stealth in general, you're bound to get an extra bonus to your roll. Let's say I need to roll a 10, but I've got bonuses from my proficiencies as I chose the background of an urchin, which has a bonus with lockpicking and stealth. I might get a +4 on my roll, which will help me succeed much easier. If any of this still sounds complicated to you, don't worry, once you play the game for just a few hours and have to interact with some of these rolls, all of this will make perfect sense to you. Now, for arguably one of the most important aspects of any playthrough in Baldur's Gate 3, that is choosing your own class. There are 12 total classes that you can choose from, with all of these being extremely different and varied in gameplay from one another, and you'll really have no problem in terms of having fun with any of these classes. In addition to the classes, each class itself has multiple unique subclasses that will further impact the spells, attacks, and proficiencies you may gain in combat, with Larian even expected to release one more subclass per class in the next big patch for the game. There's also a way to multi-class if you also want to mess around with the skills and abilities of another class, and this option will appear for you when you level up, allowing you to use some of the 12 levels you can gain in the game into another class. The 12 level cap is shared between all classes, so you have to learn to balance which class you want to be a higher level if you do decide to go the multi-classing route. If you missed the option to choose another class when you were first leveling up, or are simply not happy with the way your current build is going, there is an easy way for you to respec your character. Once you have unlocked the undead skeleton Withers in your camp, he'll allow you to change your class or essentially respec for just 100 gold. If you also want to respec your companions, this is also entirely possible. However, be careful that sometimes the classes of the companions may be integral to their own storylines, so be a little cautious in trying to change their classes outright. Getting into the exciting parts of the game, let's discuss some combat basics for Baldur's Gate 3. Starting with the most basic point of them all, let's start with actions and bonus action. You'll typically have one action and one bonus action, but this may change as you level up and change your character's build around. An attack or a spell requires you to use up one of your actions, with some special actions only available once per short rest, of which I'll explain in a later section. In addition to taking up an action, using a spell will also take up a spell slot. You have multiple spell slots, and as you level up, you'll gain higher level spells which will have their own spell slot. To simplify, for example, if you wanted to cast a level 3 fireball spell, this would cost one level 3 spell slot, which is separate to the spell slots you have for all your other level spells. In addition to your action, your bonus action will also allow you to dash, jump, or drink any sort of potion while in combat, but for most classes this will not allow you to attack using it. It's also really important to explain the concept of cantrips. This is another type of spell for spellcasters and actually doesn't consume any spell slots, but rather are just like a normal attack, and so just take up an action point in combat. You'll be able to unlock and use a few different cantrips as you level up and progress through the game. The last thing that I wanted to discuss in regards to the basics of the combat in Baldur's Gate 3, there's something called advantage and disadvantage. In order to not overcomplicate it, an advantage in combat essentially means a higher chance to roll in order to hit your enemy, whereas a disadvantage is the exact opposite. An advantage can be gained in combat over your enemy by being invisible and then attacking, or simply having the high ground on them. Oftentimes a disadvantage can happen if you have been debuffed and or have low ground in comparison to an enemy. Again, if any of this sounds complicated, in playing it yourself you'll understand all of it in no time. This point is another critical point for Baldur's Gate 3, as exploration is an essential part of the gameplay loop and you are constantly rewarded for all the exploration that you do. As you are wandering about in the gigantic landscapes and environments of Baldur's Gate 3, you'll really be able to jump anywhere, teleport anywhere, and find yourself in places that you didn't think were possible to reach. The only true limitation of where you can go and access in Baldur's Gate 3 is your own creativity in how you decide to get to certain areas that seem off limits. There are many hidden secrets littered throughout all 3 acts of the game, and even the smallest areas and environments in the game may yield entirely new areas or passages that might see you finding yourself a great new weapon, a new NPC to interact with, and much more. Every part of Baldur's Gate 3's world is filled with detail and activities to immerse yourself into, and exploring this world is really a treat in all aspects, and I implore you to really try and explore as much as you can, at least for the very first playthrough. I'm on my second playthrough of the game currently, and all the new surprises, passages, and territories that I never even knew about in my first playthrough was mind-blowing, and just goes to show how much you can truly find in this detailed world through exploring consistently. Now, to discuss the concept of short and long rests. The game has 2 types of rest available in order to replenish your characters, with each of them wielding their own benefits. With short rests, you are provided 2 of them for every long rest that you do, and using up a short rest will heal up your entire party by 50% and will often replenish certain abilities needed by melee classes such as key points for monks. Something that is critical to know is that short resting will not replenish the spell slots used by your characters that are spellcasters, and instead to replenish this, you will need to use a long rest. A long rest is when everyone in your party will go back to camp, and it's also the time where a lot of the game's companion dialogue and development will occur. So it's actually quite integral that you long rest regularly, even if you don't want to, as this will make sure you don't miss out on any core character moments. A long rest can't just be done to an infinite level, however, and you'll require materials or supplies, as they are called in game, in order to long rest. The supplies that you need are just food items or camp supply packs, both of which can be found by looting around in the world of Baldur's Gate 3, or simply just going up to various traders throughout the game and purchasing these supplies directly from them. Just to reiterate, both a short rest and long rest are critical for your party throughout this game, and you'll slowly gather when you need to use each one, especially in regards to balancing your short rest while just roaming around the world of Baldur's Gate 3. This is another important point and is something a lot of people might wonder about, especially as you progress through the game and get more companions. It might actually become overwhelming at first to decide what companions you should bring with you and which ones you should leave at camp, as bringing companions on the journey with you will see them do small talk with each other as you roam around endlessly, and may have comments on specific critical moments in the story when they are with you. Honestly, I'd recommend you to simply use the companions that you like the most. There is of course a practical element to how you compose your party, party, but it is completely viable to be able to get through the game quite easily while just bringing and building up the companions that you find the most enjoyable to interact with. Of course, you'll need to take note of all the personal quests of your companions, as you may need to bring a specific companion along in order to fulfill their personal quest, but other than that, it's simply okay to bring anyone that you want. I often like to mix a level of practicality with the companions I'd also just like to use, so often bring a healer or cleric as they're known in the game, and 2 other companions that I'd also just like to come with me on the journey. You can switch out these companions quite easily by simply going to the camp and talking to the companion you'd like to come with you instead of another. I think it's important to try and mix them around as much as you can, as there is so much unique dialogue between all the different companions, and you'll miss out on a lot of great moments if you simply travel with the exact same party for the entirety of the game, but that is definitely a viable path. For the very last tip on this list, I just wanted to reiterate that failing is just simply part of the game. As you progress further into your journey in Baldur's Gate 3, you will often fail critical rolls of persuasion or deception, which may cause you to panic as something isn't going your way. In many ways, this is simply the beauty of a game like Baldur's Gate 3, as every failure and success has its own completely separate and unique pathway, and oftentimes this can lead to extremely intense or simply interesting encounters that you wouldn't have got otherwise. However, I think it's also really important to remember that quick saves are a huge lifesaver, and you should really be quick saving as much as possible, especially before a seemingly important encounter or decision, in case you really don't want to go on the path that you have accidentally stumbled upon. You can quick save at any time by pressing F5 on PC, or on PlayStation by pressing the options button and then triangle. Other than that, I think you're all set to go on your grand journey through the world of Baldur's Gate 3. If you do have any more questions, don't hesitate to drop them down below, and I'll be more than happy to answer every and all questions to the best of my ability. Anyway, that's all from me for today's video. If you enjoyed, please consider subbing to the channel for more Baldur's Gate 3 and RPG content, and I'll see you all in the next one. Peace.